It is a pleasure to announce this last event for the semester. There will be other events in the next semester. We will start probably right after Spring Festival, so that we do the 2 holidays of the Silk Road. And speaking of Silk Road, today we fly a little bit far away from Silk Road. We go to a country where many cartographers went in the past, and where nowadays many cartographers are, especially syntactic cartographers. And it is a pleasure to announce Professor Aquiles Tescari Neto, which is assistant professor at the University of Campinas. And he holds a PhD with Professor Cinque, if I'm not wrong, at the University of Venice. And his works are relatively famous in the field, especially those works on Brazilian Portuguese, and especially on African Portuguese, and even more especially, and that's why I'm using a lot of adverbs, on adverbs. So it is a pleasure to invite Professor Tescari Neto.
Thank you very much, Giuseppe Samo. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, okay. So many thanks to the organizers from the Linguistics Department at the Beijing Language and Culture University, the International Association of Synthetic Cartographic Studies from Macau, and the Università degli Studi di Padova. It's a great opportunity to get in touch with an association of cartography and 2 important departments where high-level cartography research is done overseas. A special thanks also go to Giuseppe Samo, Dr. Giuseppe Samo, for this invitation. So the title of my presentation is why we should not call high adverbs sentence adverbs. I am having a look here on an issue of chapters 5 of my PhD dissertation, and I have actually collected some data from a couple of works which studied dedicated to sentence adverbs, and I am suggesting that sentence adverbs actually don't exist, and what we have is high adverbs and low adverbs. So to begin with, I will do a very brief introduction before spelling out the main goals of my presentation. So in the literature, starting with Jack and Duff, 1972, in the generative tradition, sentence adverbs has been described as those adverbs that modify the content of the sentence in which they appear, according to Ramay and Rica, 1998. Several papers from generative grammar, as Thomas Owen Stonecker, 1973, Renat Boch, 1976, Irene Bellert, 1977, Tom Ernst, 2000, and Shu, PhD dissertation, have also paid some attention to sentence adverbs. These adverbs modify the content of the sentence in which they appear. They actually modify the whole propositional content. So a sentence like one, Philippe has probably forgotten his credit card number, would differ in meaning and truth value if compared to a sentence without the sentence adverb, probably, like to, in that they have different truth values. Philippe has forgotten his credit card number. Well, as you know, each specific class of sentence adverbs would convey a distinct semantic value from Bellert 1977 work, Casteleiro 1982, which is a work on Portuguese sentence adverbs, Rama Enrica, 1998, and also Cinque, 1999, which has given us a whole set of functional projections in the structure of the clause where distinct classes of adverbs appear in its dedicated specifier positions. So, besides modifying the content of the sentence, these sentence adverbs also add a specific semantic flavor to the sentence they modify. For instance, in the case of domain adverbs, they add a domain-like flavor. Speech act adverbs like sincerely add a speech act feature, speech act flavor. The same with unfortunately, which is an evaluative adverb, and the epistemic adverb probably, as shown in the sentence given in 3. Sincerely or unfortunately or evidently the situation generated is very chaotic. So the sentence gets modalized and the sentence is also modified by this adverb, and they add a specific semantic flavor to the sentence. So let me spell out the puzzle. As João Costa has observed for European Portuguese, and the same is true of Brazilian Portuguese as well, for is ambiguous in Portuguese. So in a sentence like, a Maria cantou provavelmente para o patrão, Maria sang probably for her boss, we get two possible meanings. So we can get a scope over the prepositional content reading, and it is paraphrased in 4a. It is probable that Maria sang for her boss, and we also have a narrow focus reading where the adverb probably is associated with the focus of the sentence, namely for her boss. And we can give as a paraphrase for this narrow scope reading the sentence given in 4b. It is probably for her boss that Maria sang. So a sentence like for can be interpreted in Portuguese in two ways. In spite of the fact that the adverb is located to the right of the verb. So we can also get either the narrow focus reading, which is the preferred reading in European Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese as well, but we also have, it is possible to get the scope over the prepositional content where the whole sentence is modified by the epistemic adverb as suggested by the paraphrase in 4a. Given this narrow focus reading of for, one would only descriptively use the term sentence adverbs in reference to some subclasses of adverbs which can occasionally take the sentence under their scope in Romance. The adverb in 4b is associated with the complement, and this is the preferred reading in European and Brazilian Portuguese. That seems to be true also of French, as Christopher Lenzlinger, 1996, had already pointed out. So in a sentence like Je lirai probablement tu le livre, sorry for my bad French, John will probably read all the books, we would have, according to Lenzlinger's description, two possible readings. So in one reading, we would have the scope over the prepositional content reading, where probablement takes under its scope Jean lira tu le livre. So it has IP scope over the IP, or even the narrow focus reading, where the adverb probablement takes under its scope tu le livre, namely the direct object. That it doesn't have to do with verb raising since the verb must raise to the inflectional domain in French, but we can, that it doesn't have to do with verb raising, is suggested by the sentence given in 6. L'étudiant vous probablement ce film, where we have the auxiliary have, on, and the main verb to the left of the adverb probablement in French. And according to Christopher Lenzlinger, we get two possible interpretations in this case as well. So in his French, the sentence given in 6 can be interpreted as in 6a, where we get the wide scope interpretation, namely the scope over the propositional content, and the paraphrase is, it is probable that the students have seen this film. And we also have the narrow focus reading, where the adverb probablement is is associated with the focus ce film. And the paraphrase provided is the one in 6b. It is probably this film that the students have seen. So, given this association of the adverb with the focus in 4 to 6, as respectively attested by the paraphrases I have provided in the B examples of from the Portuguese and the French data, one would only descriptively use the term sentence adverbs in reference to some subclasses of adverbs which can occasionally take the sentence under their scope in Romance. So finally now, let's spell out the goal of the presentation. I'm going to argue that the domain of modification of an adverb, namely its scope, cannot be directly associated with to its syntactic status if the adverb is a sentence adverb or a predicate adverb or an adverb of constituent, so to speak. That is simply because sentence adverbs don't exist. I am also going to argue against the direct connection often made in the literature, according to which sentence adverbs should always take wide scope, namely scope over the prepositional content, which can be associated to the TP or the IP, the sentence, etc., contrary to facts as seen in 4 to 6. The conclusion at the end will be that wide scope or narrow focus, which is the association with focus, are not directly translated as the scope of a sentence adverb and scope of a predicate adverb or adverb of constituent, respectively. And, well, it has a very welcome result within a cartographic approach, and I am going to argue in favor of a cartographic treatment of high adverbs, whereby some syntactical semantic properties does not depend on their status as sentence adverbs or VP adverbs, but rather on their position in the functional sequence. Here we have the whole collection of functional projections from the structure of the clause from SAMO 20 and 9 books. From SAMO's 20 and 19 book, you may be familiar with. And what we have here within the middle field are a collection of adverbs from the Cinque hierarchy, which Cinque puts in dedicated specifier positions. I am going to show that all those traditional tests which the literature, mainly on English, has associated with sentence adverbs actually can be used to identify the adverbs from the highest portion of the clause, namely the high adverbs, which starts with the adverb usually and goes up to the adverb sincerely, a speech adverb in Italian and Brazilian Portuguese. So the outline of the presentation will be, we will start with a problematic status, talking about the problematic status of sentence adverbs. Then we will turn to some synthetic tests which help us to determine the height of the adverb in the functional sequence, instead of determining with whether an adverb is a sentence adverb or a VP adverb, as generally suggested in the literature, which takes these tests to associate with scope. So the correct interpretation of the results of those tests must take into consideration languages having more flexible positions for adjuncts other than English. These tests critically discussed will actually serve as good indicators of the rate of the adverb in the structure of the sentence once those properties explored by those tests exclusively depends on their position in the clausal hierarchy, which is a very welcome result within any cartographic approach. And then at the end, the conclusions. So, on the problematic status of sentence adverbs, here we have the representation of the functional structure of the clause in minimalist approaches, with two dedicated argumental or thematic projections, the VP and the little VP. Then in the middle field, we have the TP, the inflectional lawyer, and the complementizer lawyer in the CP domain, so to speak. Well, the literature on adverbs, which are based on this minimal representation for the structure of the clause, are used to turn into this two adjunction loci approach to adverbs, whereby low adverbs or VP adverbs, so to speak, would left adjoin to the low VP phase, namely adjunction to VP or little VP for that matter, and sentence adverbs, which I am going to call high adverbs following the Cinquian tradition, would adjoin to the TP domain. So we have two dedicated positions for adjuncts here. Well, the existence of languages like English, which lacks verb raising in Pollock's 1989 spirit, matches very well with this Jackendorfian two adjunction loci system, since the lexical verb remains in the argumental or thematic lawyer, because English does not have V to T raising, as you all know. That may have eventually been the motivation for the direct connection often made in the literature, which associates sentence adverbs to wide scope. There is much literature on sentence adverbs devoted to English, a language lacking V raising as mentioned. It is also well known that a sentence adverb cannot intervene between the verb and its internal argument, as the sentence given in 7D from Sportici's 1988 would suggest. So, although the high adverb probably can appear sentence initially in a left dislocated position, in between the subject and the auxiliary or the main verb, in the absence of an auxiliary, as shown in 7b, and also in between the auxiliary and the main verb. In English, the adjacency between the main verb and its object cannot be broken by a high adverb, by adverbs, so to speak. So given 7D, the literature on verb raising for English, has suggested that English lacks verb raising. The ungrammaticality of 7D so would be due to the ban on verb raising in English. And that would explain why the traditional, the received analysis for sentence adverbs is coincidentally descriptively accurate for English. If one turns to Romance, these two adjunction loci approach of figure 2 I have just mentioned, having two dedicated adjunction loci for the place of adverbs, the integration of the adverbs into structure, does not hold water given the sentences shown in 4 to 6 from Portuguese and French respectively. So the second reason for avoid calling these adverbs which may eventually take the prepositional content under their scope is the existence, or to, in a more elaborate way, the assumption that the structure of the clause can be split in more functional projections as the research on cartography have shown. So in H, we have the representation of the IP domain with dedicated functional projections and adverbs in their specifiers from the Cinque 1999 hierarchy. As Cinque has convincingly shown in his book, the so-called high adverbs cannot be crossed over by the active past participle in Italian. You might remember those Italian sentences: da allora non hanno di solito rimesso mica più sempre completamente tutto bene in order, tutto bene in ordine, where the active past participle can be found in between two low adverbs, which Cinque that time took as an indication of the fact that adverbs occupy dedicated specifiers within the sentence structure. And this is a good indication that these adverbs, at least in Italian, namely low adverbs, which can be crossed over by the active past participle on its raising upwards, that they should be treated as something like a low adverb. High adverbs, on the other hand, cannot be crossed over by the active past participle on its raising upwards. And I will go back to this important issue at the end of the presentation. So the increasing of the number of functional categories assumed for the representation of the IP made obsolete the use of the labels sentence adverbs, VP adverbs, a fact also acknowledged by Ton Ernst, one important researcher on the syntax of adjuncts. And Ernst, I took this quotation from Ernst 2002, page 467. They frequently invoke the terms sentential adverb and VP adverb are no longer useful or accurate, and in fact are quite misleading to the extent that they are meant to express a correlation between adjunction to sentence or VP and a type of meaning. And the third reason for avoid calling high adverb sentence adverbs, some VP adjuncts, actually low adverbs, may come to occupy left peripheral positions, a fact which has been described and discussed in details in Rizzi 2001 and Rizzi 2004. Those adverbs may come to occupy dedicated positions in the left periphery of the clause, as in the sentence given in 9 from Italian. Rapidamente i tecnici hanno risolto il problema. it's clear that the adverb in 9 does not take the prepositional content or the sentence under its scope. It is a VP adjunct, and its scope is over the past participle risolto. Empirically speaking, it's again very problematic to keep with those traditional approaches to adverbs which associate their scope to their adjunction side. If we take the adverb rapidamente to adjoins to the TP or the IP, as in old times, it would be very problematic to associate a dedicated position in the structure with the scope of the adverb, because the adverb in 9 continues to take scope over the past participle in the inflectional domain. So let us now turn to the third section, where I am going to show you some syntactic tests which help us to determine the height of the adverb in the structure of the sentence. In the previous sections, we have suggested that sentence adverbs don't exist, or to put it into a more elaborate way, that the direct link between the position occupied by an adverb in the clausal hierarchy and its domain of modification does not hold water at all. That doesn't mean, however, that one should throw the tests away, but give them a new interpretation in light of current theoretical assumptions on the clausal hierarchies. And these tests actually indicate a cluster of syntactic properties of a subgroup of adverbs occupying specific positions in the clausal hierarchy. So I am giving Miller de Oliveira 1993 work. Miller de Oliveira has studied 10 tests which are very common in the literature on sentence adverbs, and he has arrived at the conclusion at the end that of those 10 tests studied, 5 are bona fide diagnostics to indicate whether an adverb may take the sentence under its scope. I am only going through those 5 tests he considers correct. So let us now give some methodological ingredients. Given that sentence adverbs can appear to the right of the main verb in Portuguese in sentences like João comeu provavelmente o bolo. John ate probably the cake, and in other Romance languages like Italian and Spanish, one can turn to Miller de Oliveira diagnostics to see whether those 5 diagnostics show different results in contexts where a high adverb, a sentence adverb, is associated with the focus, has narrow scope, as in the sentences given in 4 to 6 of the introduction, as in a sentence like João comeu provavelmente o bolo, John ate probably the cake. If so, that does not necessarily imply a failure in the applications of the tests, but a misinterpretation of the results. The same tests will be applied to low adverbs, and the conclusion will show that Miller de Oliveira tests actually do not indicate whether an adverb has wide scope or whether it is associated with the focus. Rather, they are good indicators of the position of the adverb in the functional hierarchy of the clause. We begin by applying those 5 correct tests to the sentence given in 10, where the so-called sentence adverb is located to the left of the verb, undoubtedly having sentential scope. So we will force the interpretation. João provavelmente comprou o bolo. We will force the interpretation given in 10 prime. It is probable that John bought the cake. And each test will also be applied to an adverb not having sentential scope, a low adverb. and the data are from Brazilian Portuguese. So the first test, a sentence adverb can't be denied. So, in a sentence like João não provavelmente comprou bolo, it is ungrammatical in Brazilian Portuguese. John didn't probably buy the cake. Whereas a low adverb can be under the scope of sentential negation. So, in a sentence like o João não em vão comprou o bolo, John didn't buy the cake in vain, this sentence is fine. Although it is not clear the exact place where sentential negation would occupy in the functional hierarchy, a fact already acknowledged by Cinque 1999, it is very plausible that it should occupy a position below the lowest high adverb, and that would explain the ill-formedness of 11. The second test, a sentence adverb can't be the focus of a cleft sentence. So we can't have a sentence adverb, a high adverb within a cleft sentence. So, foi provavelmente que o João comprou o bolo. It was probably that John buy the cake is ungrammatical in Portuguese. A low adverb can appear in that position. So, foi em vão que o João comprou o bolo is fine in Portuguese. A sentence adverb can't be coordinated with the preposition. So, o João comprou o bolo e provavelmente, John bought the cake and probably is a word in Brazilian Portuguese, whereas a low adverb can be coordinated with a sentence. So, o João comprou o bolo e em vão, João bought the cake and in vain is fine. The fourth criterion, sentence adverbs can't be used as answers to questions introduced by double-weight words, where, when, and how. So, in a sentence like, how, where, when, and did John buy the cake in Brazilian Portuguese as given in A, we can't answer probably, the equivalent of probably in Portuguese, which is provavelmente. This is ungrammatical. A low adverb can be used as an answer to a question introduced by double-weight words. So, como João comprou o bolo, how did João buy the cake? I can answer that with a low adverb in vain. The next property, sentence adverbs can't be the focus in a question. So, foi provavelmente que o João comprou o bolo. It was probably that John ate the cake is ungrammatical in Brazilian Portuguese. A low adverb can appear in that position. Foi em vão que o João comeu o bolo. It was in vain that John ate the cake. That sentence is fine. So, the in-ring conclusion we arrived at is that these 5 criteria can discriminate between what is generally called sentence adverbs and predicate adverbs. Nonetheless, if one considers the narrow scope reading of the sentence adverb in 10, they will realize that the epistemic adverb will retain the same properties generally associated with sentence adverbs, irrespective of its scope in that sentence. So, in a sentence like, o João comeu provavelmente o bolo, John ate probably the cake, where the adverb is used in its narrow scope interpretation, where it narrow scopes the focus, namely the cake. This test will show, as I'm going to show in the sequence, the same results. And that is enough to suggest that this set of 5 properties are not associated with scope over the sentence as the name sentence adverb would suggest. Rather, they are tied to the height the adverb occupies in the clausal hierarchy. So, we are taking a sentence given in 10 double prime, o João comprou provavelmente o bolo, and we are forcing the interpretation in 10 triple prime. It was probably the cake that John bought. So the narrow scope reading, the narrow focus reading of the adverb probably, where it takes the direct object under its scope. So by applying those 5 tests to 10, one arrives at the same result seen for this high adverb in its uncontroversial wide scope reading, as we are going to show in the next slides. So, the first test, a sentence adverb can't be denied, and neither can the adverb probably of 10 double prime in its narrow scope reading. So, o João não comprou provavelmente o bolo. João did not probably buy the cake. It's ungrammatical. A sentence adverb can't be the focus of a cleft sentence, and the adverb provavelmente in the narrow scope reading of 10 double prime cannot be the focus either. So, foi provavelmente que o João comprou o bolo is ungrammatical. The next, a sentence adverb can't be coordinated with the preposition. Neither can the adverb provavelmente in the narrow scope reading of 10 double prime. So, João comprou o bolo e provavelmente is also ungrammatical. A sentence adverb can't be used as answer to questions introduced by double A words, as we have already seen. And the same observation can be extended to the adverb provavelmente in its narrow focus reading. We should expect the adverb in this narrow focus reading to pattern like a low adverb, but it keeps the same behavior as when it takes the whole preposition, our content under its scope. So, como, onde, quando João comprou o bolo, how, where, when, did John buy the cake? We can't answer provavelmente, probably. And finally, sentence adverbs can't be the focus in a question, neither can the adverb provavelmente of 10 double prime. So, foi provavelmente que o João comprou o bolo. It was probably that John buy the cake is ungrammatical as well. So, the winner in conclusion is, were high adverbs always sentence adverbs, irrespective of their wide and narrow scope interpretations? One should expect the sentences in 21 to 25, where provavelmente uncontroversially has narrow scope, to show different results from the sentences previously shown in 11, 13, 15, etc., where the adverb provavelmente uncontroversially has wide scope. The results should be the same of those shown for 12, 14, etc., where we have applied the same tests to uncontroversial low adverbs, contrary to facts. Everything being equal, what Miller de Oliveira's tests actually show is that there is a group of adverbs called sentence adverbs by the general linguistics literature, high adverbs here as used in Cinque's 1999 book, which can be characterized by a cluster of syntactic properties. These properties do not depend on the syntactic status of the adverb, namely, if they take under their scope a constituent or a sentence. The relevant information is the position of the adverb in the clausal hierarchy instead of the domain of modification of the adverb, whether a sentence or a constituent. So let us now turn to some other tests. As Casteleiro 1982 has shown for European Portuguese, high adverbs are subject to a wide mobility in the sentence, at least in Romance. So we can place the epistemic adverb with no change in its meaning, it keeps its epistemic feature in all of those positions shown in 26. So, provavelmente, o João provavelmente comprou, provavelmente, o bolo provavelmente. Whereas low adverbs either change their meaning or give rise to ungrammaticality if they appear in different syntactic positions. So, in the case of 27, with the adverb corresponding to carefully in English, in Brazilian Portuguese, if we place cuidadosamente, carefully, in a left peripheral position on or before the main verb, we get a subject-oriented reading. If we place it post-verbally, namely to the right of the main verb or to the right of the direct object in the sentence final position, we get a manner reading which is associated with the voice head in the clausal hierarchy. So we get a change in meaning. The next property, high adverbs serve as good as answers to yes or no questions, as Casteleiro has shown. So in a sentence like corresponding in English to so the earthquake did not cause damage, we can answer in Brazilian Portuguese and European Portuguese as well as fortunately a high adverb. So the colloquy will be postponed. Probably we can answer this with a high adverb. Low adverbs, on the other hand, cannot be used as answers to yes or no questions. So in Brazil, the corresponding sentence in Brazilian Portuguese to the English, so the earthquake did not cause damage, can't be answered with well, bad, catastrophically, already, frequently, always, or in vain in Brazilian Portuguese, which are low adverbs. Next property, high adverbs can't be the focus of emphatic constructions mocked by the phrase é que, is that, so felizmente é que o sismo não provocou estragos, fortunately is that the earthquake did not cause damage, is ungrammatical European Portuguese, and so is provavelmente é que o colóquio vai ser adiado, probably is that the colloquium will be postponed. A low adverb, on the other hand, can. So we can say something like, in Portuguese, of course, completely, frequently, terribly, again, out of nowhere, in vain, is that the earthquake did not cause damage. So the next property, these adverbs can't be the focus of a negative sentence marked with the restrictor senão, except. So, o sismo não provocou, senão, o sismo não provocou estragos, senão, felizmente. The earthquake did not wreak the havoc, but fortunately, the sentence is ungrammatical in Portuguese, and o colóquio vai ser adiado, senão, provavelmente, is also very bad, so the colloquium will not be postponed, but probably is ungrammatical in Portuguese. A low adverb can appear after this restrictor, except senão. O terremoto não provocou estragos, senão imediatamente, rapidamente, bem cedo, já de novo, do nada, completamente, frequentemente em vão, and the English translation is given on the screen. Finally, the last property. A negative active past participles can raise past low adverbs, but not past high adverbs in some Romance varieties, in some Romance languages like Italian and Brazilian Portuguese. I am taking here the anergative active and anergative active past participle because if we take a transitive verb, we can have some problems in testing this, as already pointed out by Nielsen 2004 in his paper, where we have shown some sentences from Italian quoted from the internet, where the active past participle appears to the left of the direct object, which would suggest that in this case, the active past participle has raised past the adverb probably. Contrary to facts, we would say that in this case, the adverb is a scope-taking element, and we could perhaps extend Keynes' 1998 analysis of only to those high adverbs in this context. So I am taking a negative active past participle to test this diagnostic em Brazilian Portuguese. So, João tinha mentido com frequência, de novo, do nada, cedo, bem, provavelmente, bem, rapidamente, etc. John had told lies often, again, out of nowhere, early, well, quickly, etc. These sentences are fine. Whereas a high adverb can't appear in that position unless it is stressed. So, João tinha mentido provavelmente, evidentemente, infelizmente, sinceramente, probably, evident, unfortunately, and sincerely cannot appear in this sentence final position, suggesting that the active past participle can't raise past high adverbs in Portuguese. The same is true of Italian, as Cinco had already pointed out. So, in guise of conclusions, there are convincing arguments pointing to the conclusion that sentence adverbs don't exist, or at least that scholars should take care when they use the term sentence adverb. The assumption of enriched structural representations for the clause is one reason. The fact that the appearance of the main verb to the left of a sentence adverb in Romance triggers a narrow focus interpretation for the adverb. The very fact that low adverbs, as shown by Rizzi, may be displaced to the left periphery of the clause is another reason. I have presented 10 syntactic tests which, instead of discriminating between sentence adverbs on the one hand and predicate adverbs or VP adverbs, illustrate a cluster of syntactic properties which characterize high adverbs. So, taking again Samo's representation of the whole collection of projections from the clausal structure, there might be some other projections, some other categories as shown in other cartographic works. So if we take this representation of the clause, those adverbs from the middle field, which we see from voice upwards, above voice, up to speech act, we have actually a interesting cutting point here to the left of the adverb respective, the repetitive adverb. So we have here in green the low adverbs and here the high adverbs, which we have illustrated on the basis of those 10 tests. All things considered, these 10 syntactic properties characterizing high adverbs are a direct effect of their position in the clausal hierarchy, in the functional hierarchy of the clause. They occupy the highest portion of the middle field. So these 10 syntactic properties, as we have shown, are a direct effect of their position in the clausal structure instead of their association with scope, which is a very important conclusion for every cartographic approach. Here we have some selected references. Thank you for your attention and your feedbacks. Xian, obrigado.
Thank you so much, Aquiles, for this extremely, and I use no probabilmente, but extremely interesting talk. and we have the time for questions. So as usual, you can use the blue hand, or you can type in the chat, I have a question, and then you will be unmuted.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Professor Rizzi.
Okay, so hi, Achilles.
Hi.
I had a question on how you see the difference between cases of VPs that are intransitive, in which, as you pointed out in the last slides, high
Yeah.
adverbs are very marginal or impossible unless you play with intonation, and cases in which the VP is transitive, in which the high adverb can occur between the past part. I mean, I have in mind structures with auxiliary and past participle, right? So
Okay.
complex verbal structures. And in these cases, you can have the high adverb in between the participle and the direct object. So I did not fully understand how you want to treat these cases. Is the assumption that when the adverbial occurs between the participle and the direct object, it always forms a constituent with the direct object, or not? Or you're making a different assumption, but that in that case, how can one express the difference in acceptability between the case in which the direct object is there and the case in which it's not there?
Okay. Okay, it's clear to me. Thank you very much. It's nice to see you and have your contribution. Thank you very much, Luigi. Where, if I have understood you, in sentences like Gianni ha mangiato probabilmente la mela. In this case, we can have this sentence is possible in Italian. Sorry for not being clear in my presentation. This case have been brought to light in Nielsen 2004 work, and he has actually quoted some sentence from the internet, from Italian, as this sentence suggested by you, where we have the active past participle, the adverb corresponding to probably, and the direct object, and those sentences are fine. Well, for me, the test provided by Cinque is very useful if we take, as I have shown, an intransitive verb. So we would have an intransitive verb which cannot appear to the left of the sentence adverb, where unless the sentence adverb is prosodically marked. In the case of the transitive verb, the assumption, the analysis would be an analysis where we take the adverb probably to be a case of scope-taking element, scope-inducing element, and we could extend Keynes 1998 treatment of only to those high adverbs. So it looks as though the direct object raises to a dedicated specifier before the merge of the adverb following the functional sequence, and then the remnant would be attracted to the left, giving the impression that what we have is the raising of the past participle past this high adverb, contrary to facts. Actually, it forms a constituent with the direct object, at least in Portuguese. So things like probably the cake can be raised to the left periphery. So I can cleft this in a sentence like, it was probably the cake that John ate. So the sentence is fine, suggesting that in the end, at the end, the adverb and the direct object raises to spec thought in the left periphery to value this focus, contrastive focus feature. I'm not if I was clear, but thank you for your question.
Yeah. No, it is very clear. So, in fact, this relates to another question that I wanted to ask. That is to say,
Okay.
how you are going to deal with the great variability in the position of high adverbs, right? And then I imagine that your answer would be along the same lines, is to say, you
Yeah.
need a lot of remnant movement in order to account for the different positions in which you can see different chunks with these adverbs.
So can you see my screen?
Yes.
The sentence
yes.
in 26.
Yes.
So to account for the data in 26, I would do something along the lines of 5, 20, and 4. He has actually suggested, based on your 20 and 1 paper I have already quoted, I have cited. So this left pre-proposition of provavelmente might be the result of the raising of provavelmente, probably to spec modify the spec of modifier phrase in the left periphery. This position in between the subject and the verb would be the position, the ordinary position of merge, of probably with the subject phrase placed above it, and then this position in between the verb and the direct object would be a case of attraction of the object and remnant movement. So to derive those, the placement of the different placements of provavelmente in 26, I would only turn to remnant movement in the case you have asked me, namely when the adverb is placed between the verb and the direct object. I don't have an answer in cases like with transitive verbs like give and things like that, where the adverb probably is placed between the direct object and the indirect object. I don't have a question at all. And this sentence final position, which is a sort of right dislocated one, could be derived by the raising of the remnant to the left of the adverb probably, which has been raised to the spec of modifier P in the left periphery, so a topic-like position. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Belletti?
Yes, this relates a bit to the first part of the previous question. Just to say that this position between the verb and the complement is more general, and in fact the adverb can precede the PP. He spoke probably with Mary, or it can precede another adverb like he will come probably tomorrow, and so on. So I thought of these cases many years ago in the 1990 book, and thought of these cases as a constituent adverb. So in analysis as constituent adverbs also, because you can move as you said. Now with the remnant type analysis, this could work. This was a pre-Cinquean analysis, but it's very general. So not only you can have it in between the object and the PP, as you now mentioned, but you can have it before almost any constituent, including other adverbs.
Yeah, thank you very much. In the case of other adverbs, I would say that the same type of remnant movement analysis could be applied. And you have quoted the paper from the book from 1990, right? right? I don't remember the analysis you made, you did in that book, sorry, but I read it, of course. But I guess the problem for me would be when we have the adverb preceding the indirect object with transitive verbs like give. But in the case of verb, adverb, or direct object, and then the adverb probably and another adverb like tomorrow in your example, I would say that these adverbs tomorrow would be attracted to the specifier of a position prior to the merge of the adverb.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Like only type analysis. Yeah.
Yeah, only type analysis. Thank you. Thank you, Adriana.
There are other questions. I don't see blue hands. If you have questions, you can type on the chat. Wait some seconds in case I may have a comment.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I can move to the comment. Thank you so much again for the talk. And my comment is related to cleft structures.
Okay.
Since we also have in the audience people working on cleft. The question is, so if I well understood, higher adverbs cannot be followed by the copula, whereas lower adverbs can. Yeah. Do you think it's a question of the fact that they are in the higher sentence, or they have been extracted from a lower sentence, and then for some reason there are some intervention effects playing a role and they are excluded?
Oh, that's a very nice question. And I would say that they have been extracted from the embedded sentence, and that there is a ban on the raising of the high adverb, perhaps by some, there might be an intervention effect, and I don't have an idea to explain now. Thank you very much for your question. I should read some papers on this kind of cleft sentences structure to see whether we could find an answer for the ungrammaticality of a high adverb when placed in this position and a low adverb. Well, to tell you the truth, I would like actually to see, to observe the behavior of different languages regarding these tests, because I have tested it only in Portuguese here. There are a couple of works on Romance languages, but perhaps languages may vary with respect, and it would be a very welcome result in a cartographic-like work if we observe different behaviors across languages regarding these properties. In Brazilian Portuguese and European Portuguese, it is very clear that we can divide the structure of the middle field into two zones. But maybe in other languages from other families, this the cutting point separating low adverbs and high adverbs might be different. So thank you very much. I have no answer to that. Thank you.
I see that Professor Rizzi blue hand is still up. Do you have questions? Oh, okay. No, thank you so much for your reply. I can informally tell you that if you analyze in corpora, you still find adverbial clauses in Italian and in French, relatively a good amount. And I think it's worth exploring this part. I mean, it's interesting because it merges cartography with locality. That is always a good thing. If one
you mean to look for those adverbs in corpora?
Yes, I mean, or testing directly with speakers. That would be the best option.
Nice. The best option. Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much, Giuseppe. Thank you.
Okay. If there are no, okay. Yes, Wei, you can ask a question. Can you move? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, can you hear me? Hi, thank you
Hi.
for the talk. I have a
Thank you.
question on the example sentence 10. It's more like a clarification. So I was wondering about the interpretation of the narrow scope reading of the so-called sentence adverb. John probably bought the cake. So I was
Yeah.
wondering if this kind of reading is the result of certain kind of accent on the object cake. Like in English, John probably bought the cake, not something else. So if this is the case, then how can you prove that probably is associated or scoped over this object instead of the whole proposition, which is an alternative of this focus reading? So my question, to clarify my question, is that how can you differentiate these two kind of reading, which one you call the wide scope and the one you call the narrow scope? So how do you like tell them apart?
Okay, thank you very much, Wei. Thank you. Very nice and intriguing question. So if I understood you well, you are asking how can I differentiate between the narrow focus reading of provavelmente in sentences like 10 double prime, not this one, I guess you mean this one here. Sorry, you mean this one here, right? On the screen. John did not probably buy the cake. John did not buy probably the cake, right? Where the adverb is intervening between the verb and the direct object. And so how can I show that these two readings, these two interpretations are related to prosody or something like that? Yeah, it actually, I don't realize any difference when I hear a sentence like João comeu provavelmente o bolo. For me, these sentences are ambiguous, and of course, what syntax gives as an input to PF, we have two different derivations. In the case of where provavelmente o bolo is associated with the object, narrow scopes the object where it is associated with the focus, we could raise only o bolo and then merge provavelmente, and then we get remnant movement. In the case, so this will be the input to PF to have this interpretation. In the case to PF and LF, in the case of João comprou provavelmente o bolo, in the wide scope reading, we do not raise only the direct object, but a portion of the structure where we have the unpronounced copy of the verb, and it will get reconstructed in LF. So we will have the wide scope reading, the wide scope interpretation. Prosodically speaking, I realize these two interpretations as if they have the same prosody. So in my Brazilian Portuguese, when someone says something like o João comeu provavelmente o bolo, it is ambiguous for me. Of course, if I stress the direct object, as in your English example, it is even more clear for me that I have the narrow scope interpretation. João comeu provavelmente o bolo. But I have no problem with João comeu provavelmente o bolo with these two readings. It is ambiguous, at least in reading. Yeah. in listening. Although they have different, two different derivations.
Very clear. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, if we don't have any question, we can stop our caravan for this period, since in winter in the Silk Road, well, there are parts that are extremely cold, so we just wait until the spring and the Spring Festival to reopen our meetings in on the Syntax Silk Road. I thank all the speakers, all the audience. I would like to thanks again Professor Sifugen for making this possible, and I wish you great holidays, Christmas from one side, the Spring Festival on the other side, and we will be active back in the mailing list. Probabilmente there will not be weekly meetings, but we will do the span every 2 weeks, because it's quite hard to keep a pace, a weekly pace for everyone to attend. And we probably will, and probabilmente, we are going to change also the time slot, probably in another moment of the week, because this moment will co-occur with other cartographic lessons and classes of Professor Rizzi. So we will try to merge in the best way so that we can go on and exploring new ways on the Syntax Silk Road. Thank you so much again for everything, for being here. And I wish you a great day, a great week, and great holidays.
Thank you. Thank you, Giuseppe. Thank you.
And thanks to Sun Yang Yu that made everything possible, and she is a great co-organizer. Thanks to Padua, thanks to BLCU, and thanks to everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.